Some stories start with a man, others with a machine. This one starts with both. For the last 100 years, one gun, one idea has shaped the way we shoot. The Browning over and under isn't just a design, it's a legacy.
We want to keep the same flow, the same taste, and the same smell.
A living lineage that links the past to the present every time you close the action and feel that unmistakable clunk.
This is the XS Pro, sort of the pinnacle of that 525 range.
This film is a journey through time and through places. From the cobbled streets of Liège, to the assembly floors of Herstal, to the playgrounds of the world, I've set out to follow the whole story, from conception to creation, from John Moses Browning's mind to the modern guns we shoot today.
I never put too much thought into this, of how important Browning was to every gun in my cabinet.
We'll meet craftsmen, the historians, the engineers, and we'll shoot everything from Belgian royalty to Japanese innovation. Because this isn't just a celebration of a shotgun, it's the story of how one man and one family changed everything.
Guys, welcome to Liège, just down the road from FN Herstal, which is where our story begins. Browning approached the Belgians because of some fallings out over money with other American manufacturers, and he needed somebody who could create good quality guns built to a high standard to his designs without taking all of the profits. They'd been working together for some time before the launch of the Over and Under, and 100 years ago, this was the obvious place for him to come. It's a city with great gun making, manufacturing capability, and looking to build a quality gun. Europe was the place to be. Huge gun making history, tons of craftsmen, great engravers, great stockers. It was an obvious start to the program.
This is Liège, a city that made its name on metal, wood, and fire. You might not think of it as a global centre of innovation, but for over 400 years, this place has been quietly powering one of the most skilled gun-making traditions in the world.
Up there with Saint-Etienne, Birmingham, London, Gardone-Val-Champion.
Exactly.
Liège.
Liège was the perfect city for gun making, actually. So we used these natural resources and the fact that we had a river like the Meuse, joining directly one of the biggest ports of Europe, Antwerp, Anversport, to create such a gun industry already centuries ago.
Back in the day, gun parts weren't made in factories, they were made in homes. Whole communities of craftsmen would each take on part of the process. One guy would make hammers, another triggers, another barrels. Thousands of people all working together to make guns without ever needing an assembly line.
Centuries of gun making, what sparked FN?
Gun making in Liège was like a home working already centuries ago. So then came Napoleon, so at the beginning of the 19th century, and he understood that in order to give the guns his army needs, he need to centralize a bit. So he's one of the first who tried to make all the Liège gun workers work together. But we needed some extra time, and so as you know, at the late 19th century, the political climate changed in Europe. So France and England has always been, let's say, historical enemies, but it changed at this time, and France became the biggest enemy of Germany. And you know that Belgium is exactly in the middle of Germany and France.
Awkward.
They say, yeah, it doesn't smell so good, we have to do something. And so the Belgian government decided to make an order to the guns maker of Liège, ordering 150,000 units of Moser type rifles. And so the gun makers in Liège decided to unite, because without unity it was totally impossible to meet this demand. We went from this, as you see, thousands of gun makers around the city, to this huge factory made to meet the demand of the Belgian government.
It was a perfect storm. A city full of skill and now a centralized factory with a capacity to build something game-changing. And that's when John Moses Browning came knocking. He didn't need production, he needed partnership. And FN Herstal wasn't just ready, it was waiting. They weren't just any old gunmaker, they were engineers, true engineers. Born out of necessity, yes, but driven by invention. In the decades following their formation, FN would go on to build some of the most important military rifles of the 20th century, but that wasn't all. They also built bicycles, motorcycles, and even full-on automobiles. If it needed precision machining, FN could make it, and that's what caught Browning's eye. He wasn't just looking for a gunmaker, he needed a manufacturer, someone who could take his designs and scale them with quality, with consistency, and FN had the tools to do it. By the time the B-25 was being drawn up, FN weren't just one of Europe's leading arms companies, they were one of its most capable industrial forces.
What you must know is that at first hunting was not for civilians, so it was for aristocracy, so one type of very restricted type of civilians. So obviously it was mostly for the military. Guns made in Liège, you can see them in many different hands.
This city armed armies, yes, but also armed aristocrats. The Tsars of Russia shot guns from Liège, and so did kings and queens across Europe.
John Moses Browning is the best gun inventor in the world, so he had 128 patents. How many patents do you have, Johnny?
Zero.
On your name.
Before we go any further, it's time to talk about the man himself, John Moses Browning. If you've ever picked up a gun, chances are you've come into contact with some of his ideas. Born in 1855 in Utah, John was filing patents before most of us were shaving. His guns weren't just clever, they were decades ahead of their time. The Winchester 1886, the 1897 pump, the 1911 pistol, the Auto 5 shotgun, all Browning. The man had range, from duck blinds to battlefields. If it fired a cartridge, he probably designed it, or designed the thing that inspired it.
And so at the very end of his life, John Moses Browning came to the conclusion that we could definitely improve the shotguns we had at this time. So at this time, most of hunters shoot with a side-by-side or with a semi-automatic. Over 100 shotguns already existed, but they were made mostly by British gunmaker in a very small production, and it was not industrialized, it was a bit craftsmanship. And then John Moses Browning decided to change everything, improving our way of aiming, and this is how the B-25 was born.
And so, the over and under was born. The superposed, known as the B-25. And John may have started it, but he never finished it.
Unfortunately, he didn't finish this product as he died before. He died here in Liège, in Herstal, to be more accurate.
It was his son, Val Browning, also a gifted engineer, who took over. Val took the blueprints, the prototypes, the vision, and with FN's help, made it a reality.
The mechanical principles made by John Moses Browning himself a century ago are still valid nowadays, because when you look at the Browning 825, so the brand new generation of a Browning shotgun, or the Browning B525, we keep the same mechanical principles. So that's totally crazy to imagine that what John Moses Browning did 100 years ago is still the best you can have today.
It's wild,
it's true, but it's totally wild, and it's true with over 100 shotguns, but it's true also with the machine guns in the design. So the M2 he made 100 years ago and more is still used nowadays by all Western armies.
And so in 1931, 5 years after JMB's death, the Browning Superpost hit the market. Reliable, strong, and affordable over and under. The very first of its kind.
It's fair to say that he made a very good choice when he chose to work with FN, because they had the infrastructure, they had the marketing networks, they had everything they needed to produce that gun to the great standard, and they've had the longevity to still be making it in the same factory to a very similar recipe 100 years later, and that's exactly where we're going to go now.
And that's why we're here, to see how a century-old idea from the mind of a genius still shapes every gun we shoulder today.
This is a modern version of a 100-year-old design. And it's still built here pretty similar to how it was 100 years ago?
Absolutely.
It's one thing to talk about history, it's another to walk straight into it. These are the original FN workshops in Herstal. The very buildings where the first Browning over and unders were assembled nearly a century ago. And they're still making them here. The same process, the same tools, the same care. This isn't a museum, it's a working factory.
We try to keep the same technique. Of course, when the modernity is a plus for the customer, we will use it.
Is this the same building that JMB came to?
Yes, absolutely. So we are in the old part of the workshop at FN. The other one are way more modern for all the military part, etc.
Well, those guns have come on a long way. This is still very much how it was designed by John and Val 100 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to keep the same flow, the same taste, and the same smell.
Honestly, it's almost hard to take in. In a world full of automation and shortcuts, this place still smells like blued steel, walnut dust and linseed oil, the smell of craft.
The only modern thing we add is when it adds the proper features for the customer.
Yeah, quality machining, quality materials, they've come a long way in 100 years. But the hand finishing is still the same.
Yeah, the material is still extremely similar, but I was giving you that example earlier. For example, for the top rib, knowing your eyes is extremely hard to catch any defects. We will use a machine just to make sure the side of the rib are perfectly straight, because by hand, of course, sometimes you can have a really tiny defect. It doesn't remove any value of the gun, but it's something better. So, but for the rest, we continue to use the craft of the worker, and everything is done by hand.
Lionel set me free to have a little look around this place, and we're going to start with the barrels. So this, guys, is how Browning make their barrels in the traditional way. Same way they've been making them for a very long time. This is a layout of a demi-block barrel. We've looked at monoblock barrel construction before, where you make a monoblock and you put two tubes in. This is a demi-block. The way this works is like this. They buy in a forged billet, that is a pipe and a block, and that's got to be forged, not cast, so that the grain structure of the steel is in the right way. They then drill a hole in the front, a hole in the back that meet up perfectly center. They say they do this because it's more accurate. Drilling two short holes of this size accurately is easier than drilling one full-length hole accurately.
The demi-block method isn't just old school, it's brilliant. It allows perfect bore alignment and strength, and it's one of the many reasons that B25 barrels feel so alive in the hand. You're not just holding tubes here. For lack of a better word, you're holding sculpture.
After that, external machining, back-end machining, joining of top to bottom, so the top bottom half and the top half. And this is done with silver solder. They use two different types of solders. They weld the two lumps together with silver solder because it's much harder. You don't really need to remove those two things ever. Very high temperature process. And then they stick the ribs on with tin solder.
Tin solder melts around 230 degrees centigrade. Silver solder, up to 700 degrees. That lower temperature means you can do repairs without risking the barrel temper. And with a gun like this that's designed to last generations, serviceability kinda matters.
The ability to strip and relay ribs is important. If you silver solder on your ribs, if something gets inside, the process of taking them off without damaging the barrels is extreme. To the point that with the silver solder, as you saw, they actually have a coil system to heat it up so they don't change the temper of the barrel steel. Tin solder. You're not doing it at a temperature that really matters. That's done in a traditional way, bound, wedged, each of these ribs being individually hand filed to have the perfect fit and join. This is the way it's been done for a long time. Tin solder, adding in a wax to make the solder flow into all of the joints perfectly. And after that, a finish, polish, and well, before they black it, they got to joint it to a gun. Once those barrels are together, they've got to be joined to an action. This is done in the 100-year-old way with smoke, blacking, and hand filing.
You might think this looks old-fashioned, and it is, but this right here is why a B25 feels the way it does. The smoke lamp technique is as old as gun making, and there's still nothing better. They coat the surfaces in carbon soot, gently fit the action to the barrels, work the parts together and look for where the black rubs off. That is where the contact is, and so that is where they file. They repeat that process dozens of times until the joint is perfect.
Why is hand fitting so important?
Because in the industrial fabrication, in fact, you have some tolerances between the different parts. And to make sure all the parts are perfectly fitted together, the only way is to do the black lamping. When you have a perfect fit, you don't have any movement of the part during the shoot. And if there's no movement, there's no use. So that's the reason why you can have B25 lasting for almost a century. It's because nothing is moving during the shoot.
That right there's the magic. No stress points, no play, everything in perfect harmony. This isn't just engineering, this is proper gun making. Sculpture, again for lack of a better word, and if you've ever doubted whether hand-fit guns are worth it, well, this is where the difference lives. Once you've felt one, you'll get it.
At this point, the action is still quite rough finished. It needs to be shaped, chiseled, filed up. This is done again by hand with chisels and files, and they've got dozens and dozens of different files of different shapes to make sure this job is done perfectly. Not only have both sides of that action got to match perfectly, but when doing a pair, all of it has to match not only in mirror, but in a mirrored mirror. It takes time, it takes purpose, and it takes years of skilled handwork to even get to the level where doing this is possible.
This is a bit I really love. The part machines cannot fake. You can't program feel and you can't automate instinct, and this kind of gun making is the result of years of apprenticeship followed by decades of experience, with each process featuring hundreds of tiny corrections. And all those things come together in one perfect end product.
From the very early days of the B25, their wood has been graded a little differently. The main difference really isn't the fact that they don't have different levels. It's because, as we know, walnut is not all created equal. Down in the roots, you get some really fortunate pieces of wood with this beautiful mineral lines, cross-grain fiddleback, and if you're lucky, there's no big sap holes in the middle. That is higher grade wood. It's rare, it's beautiful, and well, it does command a higher value. Many gun makers grade in numbers. Browning chose letters, A, B, C, D, and E. A, plain, B. I mean, not bad, but not gonna set your world alight. C, D, there's a little step up, and then you have E. Sort of ridiculously beautiful, rare pieces of wood with perfect conformity. Back in the day, it would have been French and maybe Turkish walnut. Nowadays, with the shortage of quality walnut on the market, they're having to stretch further afield to find what they need.
Wood is a funny thing. For many, it's just the furniture on the gun, but it's so much more than that. It's the part you fall in love with first, and it's the part you feel every time you hold the gun. It's also one of the only parts of a gun that's got a mind of its own. gun makers can spend hours matching grain direction to recoil lines, because if the grain flow's wrong or there's a hidden flaw, it might not survive a decade of hard use, let alone 100 years. I've been known to talk about the soul of a gun, but here, right here, is where that soul starts to take shape. It's not just about engineering anymore. Now each gun becomes something personal.
It's not just hand fitting with metal, but all of that hand fitting and touch points is important with wood to metal as well.
Absolutely. In fact, we use the same principle, but instead of using smoke of the lamp, we use a mixture made of red pigment and fine oil. We will recover the metallic part with that paste, and that will allow us to see where are the contacts, in fact. So we want to have contact on certain zone, and we want to have a really tiny gap on the others.
Stock fitting by hand means you're looking for a perfect contact in just the right places and just enough space in others. Get it wrong, too much contact in the wrong zone, and the recoil doesn't flow through the main screw. Instead, the wood absorbs stress in weird directions, and that's when you get cracks in the head of a stock. But get it right and you've got something that'll last 50, 70, even 100 years.
We don't want any interferences with the wrong zone, because that will probably give an impulsion to the recoil on the wrong side, and you would crack the head of the stock. So it's absolutely capital to do the perfect fit.
This stage right here is where human skill completely outperforms machines. A CNC can cut a shape, but it can't see how the grain flows. It can't feel how the oil and pigment mark the contact, and it can't judge recoil force. Only a trained eye and a steady hand can do that.
How many hours goes into one B25 before engraving?
All depend the grade, because we have B grade until side plate. But I would say we need around 500 to 1,000 hours to make something perfect. And for the engraving, it can be up to 600 hours also.
You heard that right. 1,600 hours on a single gun. That's one craftsman's full-time job for nearly a year. And they do 30 of these per year. That's not mass production, that's something much closer to art.
It's now time to turn that big headed up block of wood into your measurements. That's done with draw knives, rasps, in the old way, taking that big lump of wood down into your special shape.
Once shaped, the wood is grain sealed using rotten stone, an old school clay and oil blend that hardens inside the pores. Then checkering is added by hand, and finally that unmistakable hand rubbed oil finish. It's not just for shine, it's for longevity.
Soon after using it with any kind of rubbing and wear, it will go matte, but the finish will remain. The aesthetic is semi-important, but the longevity and the quality of the finish is actually what it's there for. The shine is secondary to having a good waterproof, weatherproof base.
Everything you've just seen, from draw knife to linseed oil, is 100 years old and 100 years proven. This is gun-making tradition passed from one set of hands to another.
One of the final stages is engraving. This is done to a whole series of old patterns and new. If you don't want something from the book, they will take on custom commissions, and they have some of the best engravers in Europe based out of this factory. And as Lionel said earlier, it can take hundreds of hours.
Engraving isn't just decoration, it's a signature on a gun. It tells you when the gun was made, by whom, and for what purpose. It connects the owner to the gun and the gun to its time. Browning engraving patterns are legendary. The Diana, the Midas, the B2G, each one a product of its era and yet timeless.
Look, I know that this doesn't make the end product any better technically than one of its Japanese cousins we're going to look at later, but it does make it a hell of a lot more special.
It's easy to say engraving doesn't matter, that it doesn't affect how a gun shoots. And you're right, it doesn't. But the truth is, a gun like this is more than just a tool, it's history in your hands.
I love traditional gun making. This place is very different to what it once was. I'm sure back in the day this was rows and rows of benches of people turning out guns. Nowadays it's a bit different. There's less workers, but I'm glad this place still exists as a homage to the past, but also as a gun-making center. It's clear that the passion and experience that comes from this high-level craftsmanship, this old-world gun-making, does leak into their new gun world. What sets this gun apart from a modern production over and under?
But that is really the pinnacle of our brand. So we spend hours and hours to find the best material, to do the best fitting, and also there's a part of art. So we have some of the best engraver in Europe, and we want to make sure every B25 is solid, reliable, but also completely unique and we hope beautiful. It's our point anyway.
This is the genius of the B25. It industrialized something previously only handmade. And now, 100 years on, it has swung back. Fewer guns, more handcraft, and each one made as well or better than the originals. They aren't just building a product here anymore, they're maintaining the legacy of the B25 itself. And for anyone who appreciates what it takes to do that, there's something beautifully reassuring about this little corner of Belgium still making things the old way.
There's something super special about a handmade gun, and the fact those guns are still handmade, hand-finished to the standard they were 100 years ago, if not better, is just a fabulous thing. It does warm my heart to know that it still exists. But that wasn't the point when Browning came up with the superposed. The intention of the B25 when launched by Val Browning and, well, John Browning when he was alive, wanted his guns to be attainable. Attainable, good quality, hard-working guns. So the B25 couldn't be expensive. The whole process of the design and the reason FN was brought in was to manufacture on a scale that kept it affordable. It was affordable. It was equivalent of £4,000 back then. That's a quarter of the price of the cheapest English gun of the day. Pretty much, over and underwise at least. And that leaves me thinking that potentially without the B25, would over and unders ever have become as popular as they are today? Because it's another 25 to 30 years until we see other manufacturers producing good quality over and unders that were attainable price-wise. I guess I never put too much thought into this of how important Browning was to every gun in my cabinet. And as much as I appreciate them being built today, the price point is above where I'm at and the production quantity isn't going to serve a mass market, which is why it's important that these guys moved on with the times to keep their guns accessible to the likes of you and me, which is exactly what we're going to go and learn about now.
By the 1970s, something had to give. The B25 was brilliant, but brilliance is expensive. As wages rose across Europe, so did the price of building these guns. The dream of an affordable, reliable, every man over and under was slipping, and so Browning looked east.
In the 70s, we faced a big challenge. But as you know, the quality of life improved in Belgium as in the rest of Europe, so the paychecks improved and so the prices of the shotguns. And then we faced a big problem in the 70s, but we changed this problem in opportunity. So in the 70s, the directors of the FN Herstal, Browning, saw a copy of a Browning shotgun, but a very good copy. A very good copy. And so, oh my God, and it's called Miroku.
Now they could have sued, but they didn't. Instead, they got on a plane because what they found in Japan wasn't piracy, it was potential.
They saw the capacity of production, the seriousness and of the people there, and the fact that they were producing actually really good gun at Miroku. And so instead of suing them, they say, okay, maybe we should start working together.
And so began one of the most successful international collaborations in gun-making history. Browning kept the design and the heritage. Moroku brought consistency, cost-effectiveness, and scale.
This is the beginning of the Japanese history of Browning that still exists nowadays, as most of the Browning catalog is done in Japan.
And so the Japanese Browning was born. We started with the 325 and the 125 in concurrence. That was a hybrid between Japanese manufacture and Belgium hand finishing. 425 and the 525, each with their game, sporting, and even more dedicated competition models. This is the XS Pro, sort of the pinnacle of that 525 range, built off the same body that we've seen made by the Belgians.
This is where heritage meets practicality. You got the DNA of the B25, but made in a way that most people can actually afford. And here's the thing, these guns are still hand finished, but not to the same degree as the B25, of course. Still, no two are identical. You'll still find little differences, little touches, the kind that remind you that people built these guns.
There's been some minor updates to the way the barrels are made, the way that the trigger sears work, just to refine it for the modern era, but the basic principles of large locking bites, ejectors, and manufacture have remained pretty similar. I used to joke, if you buy one of these, they are still capable of being given to your grandkids, and it was a terrible thing to sell when we were working in a gun shop because you'll only ever sell it once. This XS Pro still stands as a flagship of that 525 range, a pinnacle of what can be made with great gun design, 100-year-old gun design, quality manufacture, but done in a process that actually keeps a gun semi-affordable. You know, you haven't got a lot of the luxuries we've seen in the B25, but to be honest, you don't need a lot of those. You really don't to break plays. They're nice things to have, but I think JMB would be proud of what his legacy still stands for. Although obviously, we've seen other updates in the way this gun and action has been designed.
I think this is where Browning got it so right. They didn't cheapen the gun, they just found a way to reduce the cost of a very similar build process. And they stuck to their principles, making something practical, shootable, affordable, and strong. A true working gun with a century-old soul. We've seen where Browning's guns began and how they've evolved to become some of the most trusted shotguns in the world. This is the Browning 825, the latest chapter in a 100-year story.
A century on, this is what Browning over and under is. Absolutely. In fact, the 825 is the DNA of the B25.
While it might look like a cousin to the B25, it's a full redesign on that classic action built from the ground up, but still grounded in what made the original great. It's lighter, more balanced, and softer to shoot.
The difference between the 725 and the 825 is a matter of balance, in fact. You had a good gun on the 725, you had a low action frame, you kept that, so all the advantages that you had on the 725, you still have it on the 825, except that you now have a feeling and a balance that you get on the 825, and also the mechanic inside has changed. You can now shoot lower charges.
24,
20, 21, even 21.
Which is pretty impressive for an inertia trigger, out of the box.
In fact, inside they changed some parts that feel the balance more in the middle.
This gun doesn't try to be a B25, it doesn't need to. Instead, I'm sure it's what the B25 always wanted to become. A modern, reliable, affordable over and under for the 21st century.
Yesterday we saw all of the heritage. This, as you said, is the innovation, but there is still heritage there. I guess the question is always, what's next?
What's next? In fact, we improve it every 10-15 years. So I think the next level will be maybe in 10 years, but you still keep your gun for life.
That's the thing about good gun design. Once you've got it right, you don't need to reinvent. You just evolve, you refine, and you pass it on. And here's the beauty of it. If you look after one of these, you're never gonna need to replace it. Just like the B25, a modern Browning is still pretty much a gun for life.
Looking at how these things were built is cool, but I didn't want to leave this documentary without shooting the gun itself, a B25. So I've come up to Barbary and borrowed one of the gun rooms here. This is a 2011 built gun. Given the limit of manufacturer, you know, maximum 3 dozen guns a year, getting your hands on a new one to test is particularly difficult. This Diana grade is beautiful, and I've taken it for a little shoot this morning to give it a full workout.
It may have been built in 2011, but it might as well have been built in 1931, because as we saw, that build process hasn't really changed. The same hand-chiseled action, the same demi-block barrels, the same checkering and hand-rubbed oil finish.
Starting at the back, we have a skip checkered plate. It's actually finished in say wood with a hidden plug with engraved screws. It's touches like this that set the B25 apart. That's old world gun making. You could slap a pad on there, you could put an extra piece of wood on there, but this is proper gun making art. The wood is beautiful. If you want a perfect piece of wood with a good straight grain structure and as much figuring as possible at the back, I don't think you could ask for a better piece. As we've said, Browning source their wood from around the world, wherever the soil and growing climate conditions are right to produce this kind of wood. The right density, the right malleability to be able to craft it by hand. You think these things aren't CNC'd, and so the craftsman has a proper intimate relationship with the wood, which makes the wood quality even more important. They're going to be chiseling it, filing it, using draw knives to actually turn the big block into this, and so the wood needs to be right to be able to work that way. The action, the same 100-year-old action with Diana engraving is beautiful. I'm a big fan of many of the Browning engraving designs. You've got to think a lot of these things actually set the precedent for a lot of modern gun engraving looks-wise, and this is no different. Fully hand engraved and hand finished. One of the most important things about a Browning is this, that closure. And it's actually, I guess, regulated acoustically. Without the woodwork on, they try and regulate the barrels, the action and the forend, as we've said, to have the perfect closing sound. Not only the perfect closing fit, but the perfect closing sound. And once the woodwork goes on, you get that solid, reliable, familiar clunk. It's a very nice sound, and for anyone who's into Brownings, well, you'll get it. The forend on a B25 sets it apart as well. Browning's original design dictated that a man has 2 hands, and ergo the gun should come into 2 parts, not 3. And so we have a captive forend that slides forward, little tongue comes out the bottom, and the gun comes apart in 2. You get nice little touches like 3-piece forends where the top pieces of wood are attached and the bottom part slides back and forth, and when it's all locked together it looks like 1 piece of wood. That is one of my favourite things about Brownings, when you get that 3-piece forend. Inherently, it takes a huge amount of work to do this, and so on the Japanese guns they went to a 3-part gun for ease of manufacture, also just cost saving, keeping that gun attainable to the masses. The rib is very slightly tapered from what looks like 4 or 5 mil down to 3 with a tiny bead sight in the end. It's a beautiful sighting plane, and having now seen how these barrels are manufactured, I mean, I appreciate this gun on a whole new level, as is often the case when you go and see the effort and craftsmanship that goes into one of these. And you know what? It shoots just as well as it looks.
When it comes to shooting one of these things, you don't really think about the engraving or the checkering or the linseed oil, you just shoot. Because all the hard work that goes into one of these guns does result in something special. Someone spending 500 hours putting it together pretty much guarantees it'll handle just right. And I guess in the back of your mind, holding one of these things and being the beneficiary of all that craftsmanship does make you a little more conscious about pointing it in the right direction.
Straight out of the box, I was smashing targets properly, instinctively. The beauty of any gun that's handmade is they've spent the time, the craftsmen spend the time making sure that it handles perfectly from the off. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the B25 in its modern iteration. A thing of beauty, a honouring of the past.
Like you, I'm not sure I'll ever afford a brand new B25. But like many of these special guns, I am glad they exist. because it means we haven't forgotten how to do things properly. And it means that even in a world of using CNC either to cut costs or boost performance, craftsmanship still exists. It's a mixture of pleasure and performance and proof that the best ideas don't age. They just settle into their purpose.
I think, although Browning never saw this gun come to pass, dying in 26, and this gun being launched the first time in 1931, I think he'd be proud. I think this is the sort of thing, given that many of his other designs are relevant, but many have fallen by the wayside or be surpassed, this one hasn't really.
So 100 years ago, a man stood in a Belgian workshop with an idea that would shape the way millions of people shoot. This one, a new kind of shotgun. Stronger, smoother, smarter, and more accessible. Built not for royalty or the elite, but for every hunter, every sportsman, and every person who just wanted a gun that worked and lasted. That idea became the B25, and from that one design grew an entire lineage. Guns that evolved, that adapted, that travelled the world and never forgot where they came from. I've walked the floors where the first ones were built. I've seen the modern machines, the old hand tools, the racks of raw walnut and polished steel. I've fired the old legends and the latest innovation, and I can say this without a shred of hesitation. Browning got it right. So here's to the B25, to JMB, to Val, to every engraver, stocker and solderer who has spent time building one of these. To a century of breaking clays, chasing birds and just feeling good with a gun in your hands. And finally, here's to the next 100 years. Because if the first century looks like this, the future is guaranteed to be special.
Thank you for watching TGS Outdoors. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, share and subscribe to the channel. The channel would not be possible without the support of our amazing sponsors who keep videos coming to you week after week. If you really enjoy the channel and want to support it yourself, please consider becoming a member. Channel members get a bit of extra content.
Today we're going to be talking about good shooting advice.
But mostly, you just keep us going and we love the support. There's a great community goes on behind the scenes. Take care guys, goodbye, and we'll see you on the next one.